Hey, we're live.
We're live. Calling Chris Anderson in London.
This is Chris Anderson in London.
I
Calling
know
Rick
it
Beyer in
is.
Chicago.
Yeah,
Well, I just feel
greetings.
like I should say it. I mean, we do it all the time.
Right, that's good. It's good to have a little reinforcement, communication for people who don't
right.
like that. That's Chris Anderson. They
I could
didn't
say
know.
this is C. Jonathan. Is that better?
Right. So, hi everybody. We'll wait a moment for people to join us so we can get started for real. And of course, we're talking here about history and other things sometimes every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks to the help and support of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, and all of our broadcasts are archived on the History Happy Hour webpage, historyhappyhour.net.
Ooh.
And Chris, I am very impressed. You've changed location there a little
I
bit
have.
here, and I think
Yeah.
we all need to know a little bit about your new location there. And you have guys now.
Yeah, well, we have all the books, of course, and I have my little bagpipers up top, and Blackadder down here.
Oh, your Blackadder collection.
Yeah.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
my fat bastard next to the Blackadder.
All right, watch your language.
Oh, it is. See?
Yes.
And my damn it doll.
All right, so it's an excellent and
And some books.
You're wearing a jacket, which is obviously in deference to our guest today. They
I
should
am.
probably be very grateful for that. And Chris, we should before we play the open and get started, we should give people the heads up that we will be off next week,
Yes.
May 2nd. So you can finally get to that meditation summit that you've been planning all these weeks. And we'll be back on May 9th. And we've got some great shows coming up, including a very special D-Day show. We have quite an extravaganza planned for June
Multiple
6th.
guests, multiple locations.
I know it's going to be. It's television has never seen anything like this.
That's right.
And we have other History Happy Hour developments in the works as well, because we'll be moving in the coming weeks to a dedicated Facebook and YouTube page. So if you want to be in the know about what's happening, you can sign up for the History Happy Hour email newsletter, and you can send an email to the address that annoyingly keeps scrolling across the screen below, info@historyhappyhour.net. Chris, have I used up enough time here that we can finally get going?
Well, we can in just a second. I'm going to be an unabashed proud father and give a shout out to my daughter Madeline, who just accepted her offer to the University of Toronto. So,
Oh, fantastic.
bleed blue.
Here's to Madeline. All right. That's
All right.
awesome. Good for her. Good for
All right.
her. Now we're ready.
Now we're ready. The bar is open.
The bar is open. You know, it's Oscars night, Chris. And we're going to be talking about a movie during today's show, but there's not really much of a connection. As our topic this week is the original man behind the curtain, L. Frank Baum, the author who created Dorothy Gale, Toto, the Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, Witches, Wicked and Good, and of course the wonderful wizard himself. And he's the subject of a new documentary film on PBS Experience called American Oz. And joining us today are the folks who made that film, Tracy Heather Strain and Randall MacLowry. And now I will embarrass them by reading their bio while they're here to react to it. They have both worked on numerous films for PBS, American Experience, Nova, American Masters. Their critically acclaimed film Sighted Eyes, Feeling Hard, about playwright Lorraine Hainsbury, received a prestigious Peabody Award, or Peabody as the rest of the world says it. They've made some military history documentaries as well, including The Battle of Chosin that Randall made and Building the Alaska Highway that Tracy made. And they both serve on the faculty of Wesleyan University's College of Film and the Moving Image. In addition to being business partners and faculty colleagues, they are both happily married to each other. So Tracy and Randall, welcome.
Thank you. It's a
Hi,
pleasure to be
thank
here.
you
Hello.
for having us.
Come on, you've never had an introduction like that.
No.
I don't know.
Never had one like that. Never.
She shakes her head and goes, "Oh."
So we hope you brought a drink with you, a cocktail with you, or something to keep you going through the show.
Cheers.
Yeah, excellent.
Cheers.
And
Good
my,
tea.
my beer today is in my Second City glass because that's Chicago, and Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz in Chicago.
That's your connection.
There you go. It's not much, but you do what you can.
There we go.
Guys, we're going to start out before I ask you the first question. We're going to just give people a quick look at the trailer for the film before we jump in.
He had a flair.
Maybe.
Nope, you had.
Yeah, pushing buttons here. Maybe we're not going to.
He had a flair for the theatrical.
He was always looking for the next big thing.
He was ambitious, and he had an amazing imagination.
L. Frank Baum was literally a rainbow chaser. He went from one profession to another, and he failed at almost everything but writing children's books.
No one was expecting The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
There was nothing on the market quite like it.
It was not typical of the children's books being published at that time. In every other fairy tale, the heroine has to marry the prince.
Baum did not see gender the way a lot of people of his time saw gender. That was a pretty revolutionary thing.
The voice of Dorothy, the confidence, figuring out how to solve problems when the men around her are dissembling.
Dorothy really set the stage for little girls getting out of the house and going on adventures the way that boys do.
Every generation reinterprets the story based upon what their experiences are.
It's a story that can be adapted to a different cultural setting, to a different time and place, without really losing the fundamental idea. This is our national fairy tale.
I think for Baum, the fact that Oz does exist beyond him was the best success he could hope for.
And there is this power in Baum's invention that speaks to children today as clearly as it did back in 1900.
Okay, well, Tracy and Randall, I guess I would start by saying, obviously, The Wizard of Oz captured our imagination. L. Frank Baum's a fascinating guy, but what is it that, for you, really excited you about doing this documentary?
Well, for me, I had 14 books, Oz books on my shelf growing up. In fact, I schlepped them around with me as an adult until maybe just even a few years ago. So they were always a part of my life, and I thought it'd be fun to make a film about someone that played a role in my childhood.
For me, I did not grow up having read the book. I was introduced to the story of The Wizard of Oz through the 1939 film on television, which is where our film actually starts. So I think many people from my generation, growing up in the 60s and 70s, every Thanksgiving holiday was family time, was sitting around the TV, and every year, once a year, was The Wizard of Oz, and that's what drew me to the story. And I was fascinated to learn, that about the book, and then also about the author. And when I found out that the book was published in 1900, I just knew that there was going to be some sort of interesting historical aspects to his life that would be really a lot of fun to explore.
Yeah, it's crazy that it's 110 years since he wrote that, and it's still going wildly strong. Yeah,
there's another, adaptation into a film that has been talked about just in this past year of, I think, going back more to the book, and who knows what it'll turn out. It's not going to be a musical like the 39 film, but yeah, it doesn't seem to end. It doesn't seem to have a, the shelf life is.
We could all wish for that kind of success.
They'll be watching the Ghost Army 100 years from now, right?
Oh, yeah. We're going to get to the Ghost Army later on.
Oh, okay.
Fear not. Fear
Okay,
not.
good.
This is totally a Ghost Army related topic, I'm sure.
So, guys, what are the things I think that would be helpful? Because I come from what little I knew about the topic. I knew about the film. I was vaguely aware that somebody must have written something to make a film. But beyond that, nothing. So who's this Frank Baum guy, and kind of just a little bit about his background, maybe, to get started?
Sure. So Frank Baum was he was born in 1856, and he was born into a relatively life of luxury, a life of comfort. And his father had made a fortune early on in the oil business, in the Pennsylvania, New York oil boom. And so Baum grew up with a lot of comfort and had the opportunity to sort of read, and was tutored and had kind of a space to sort of exercise his imagination. And that's really what his life sort of became about, was sort of finding ways to let his imagination lead him along a variety of career paths, and the fact that, 1856, he died in 1919, and so, this is a very transformative time in American history, the leading up, and with as I said, the book being published in 1900, that turn of the century, there was so much change going on in the country, from an agrarian society to industrial society, and sort of America becoming, on the world stage as a world power at the turn of the century. And so Baum becomes a witness to this, and he is an individual that's, is a storyteller. And for what our challenge was sort of looking at his iconic, classic story of The Wizard of Oz, and looking at that in terms of trying to get a sense of what some of the inspirations that led to that in Baum's own life and the things that were going on around him in the world. But Baum, I think, was representative of America in other ways too, in that he did have this, he was constantly reinventing himself. And he did come from a wealthy background, so he had, a cushion for many of the careers he tried, but he failed at many things. But he constantly was that ability to sort of turn to some other passion, or he had the same passion of kind of wanting to, in many ways, tell stories in what he was doing, but it was finding a different way to sort of finally get to where he's able to succeed, and with his writing, which is kind of something he'd already done. He'd always done since he was a child, was writing. So he kind of never veered away too far from that. Long-winded answer, so I'm sorry.
No, that's.
We're still getting used to having on two guests at once, so this is not our, we're usually we're one guest and we're rapid fire hitting them. But Tracy, did you want to add anything to that? I don't want to leave you out of that question.
Oh, no, I think Randy covered it. We're good with, you said we were happily married, and, we know how to.
We don't want to end that.
Work together.
We don't want History Happy Hour to be the cause of unrest in the strain of MacLowry.
I'll jump in if I have something to say. If he hasn't said
and
it.
he did all these things, right? So that he failed at, and some of them are listed in the trailer. But he was tried to raise show chickens, and he tried to be. He worked as a journalist, and he worked. Doing all sorts of different things. One of the ones that I thought was really interesting was he moves in, I'm going to say 1888, I think is the year, and he moves to this town, is sort of a new up-and-coming town in, is it South Dakota?
South
Dakota Territory at the time.
Yeah,
just about to
Aberdeen.
turn South Dakota.
So he is like out in the boonies, right? He's out on the frontier, and he opens this store, which is itself kind of a fantasy. And I want to play a clip from your film about that.
On Monday, October 1st, 1888, less than 2 weeks after moving to town, Frank Baum, dramatically announcing his arrival, held a much-publicized grand opening of a new store called Baum's Bazaar. Nearly 1,000 people showed up, some likely enticed by the promise of a box of chocolates shipped in from Chicago for every lady attending.
He had a flair for the theatrical. And so for him, the store is a stage. That had to be an experience. It's like, come, see the exotic goods, see it all on display. You've never seen so much in one place before.
On either side of the room, braved a local newspaper, are cases of pottery, glassware, toys, oxidized brass ornaments, Japanese novelties, fancy leather, and plush goods.
He doesn't go to start a feed store. He goes to start a novelty store. He sells all kinds of things, many of which are not actually needed, but they represent the dreams and the desires of people to engage in this new kind of world of goods and commodities.
Baum wrote all the ads that appeared in local newspapers for Baum's Bazaar. He would have special events to bring people into the store. Baum believed in entertaining children, and all the kids just loved going to Baum's Bazaar because there are all these wonderful toys.
Mr. Baum has demonstrated in a very short time, wrote the Aberdeen Daily News, that he possesses to an enviable degree the push and enterprise necessary to the Western businessman.
I just think you guys must have been so excited to find this because it's such a wonderful window into what comes later.
Yeah, it was great to think about this guy deciding that he's not going to make it on the East Coast. He doesn't feel like this is the place for him, but sees an opportunity out in the West where his in-laws were. And, his wife's family, many of them had already moved out there. And so it is kind of fascinating to think he opens this store, not just any store, but this store that, might have been, like in maybe even a fancier version of remember when Pier 1 first opened, and it had all this stuff in there, and, things you didn't
Sure.
need and things from other places. Because over time it kind of, Pier 1 changed, right? But when it first opened, and it was just full of all sorts of oddities and exciting little things that you didn't really need. And yeah, for us, this was great because, when you think about going to a town out there in the West and you're thinking about farms, the original thinking is like, okay, it's going to be pretty dull. But suddenly we're doing the research and we're finding these ads and that are describing, what's in this store. And so it was exciting for us to kind of work with animators to come up with the look because we don't know what it really looked like inside, but we wanted to give people, audiences, the sense of the kind of excitement that it engendered, just walking into the place. But in terms of storytelling, it's great because, they don't really need that out there in the farm. And when that drought comes, right? Of course it's going to fail. It just seemed like such a bad business.
Well, thank goodness it failed for us, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't know about Sears, we'd know about Baum's department store or, whatever, and we wouldn't have the Wizard of Oz.
You drive down Route 66 and you stop at Baum's right after the largest
Baum's.
mall in the
If you
street.
mention the newest, seeing the latest thing that Baum's brought, it would be like a Sharper Image, right? Or something like that.
Right. Yeah, but it's kind of cool to have this store that's also like where kids would come in and listen to stories, and you just really wanted it to be a community center. It's really community minded.
Well, you get this idea of this. I got the idea from your film of this restless soul who's looking to find his niche, right? He's looking to find the groove that he fits into it, but he's got all this stuff inside him. He's got the fantasy stories and he's got the showmanship and he's got the desire, and it's just like, where is it going to work?
Yeah, I think he always has that sense of sort of having these ideas kind of beyond the moment. And so, for like Baum's Bazaar, it was really, I think for him, it was the joy of actually coming up with sort of these ideas and a way to sort of, he was an ad man. Prior to Baum's Bazaar, he'd been working for his family's, one of the family companies, which was an oil company. They were selling axle grease, and he was trying to find creative and humorous ways to sell axle grease and trying to create a story around that. And so it was always that sense of...
Sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
I was so excited about axle grease that I removed you. Like, you can't say axle grease on this show.
And so, but it was, and he thought about advertising, I think, as well, and how would you sell things. And he, after the store fails, he starts writing this. He takes over a newspaper. It's one of 9 newspapers in Aberdeen, a small town.
I know, that was incredible also. How big is Aberdeen at that time?
It's about 3,000.
And it had 9 newspapers.
Yeah,
It's a different time.
And so he was trying to create his own voice within that newspaper, and he would write about, he had two separate columns. One was called The Editor's Musings, which was sort of more of his personal opinions, and then something which we didn't get into called Our Landlady, which was a sort of a fictionalized story that he created and had several different characters to it, and kind of talking about
like a serial.
It was a serial thing, and it was sort of that's the way he could sort of talk about things. Some things were actually town related, and people could know who he's poking fun at and things like that. But in one of his editor's musings, he talks about sort of the age of deception. This is, Barnum is coming around, is becoming popular at this time, and he understands that idea of sort of how that there's a way that the public can be deceived and so on, and advertising is part of that. And that sort of plays, I think, out a lot in many things in his work. I mean, you could obviously think about the Wizard and sort of the deception that the Wizard does within the story. And later in Chicago, we'll probably talk about, he starts another magazine called The Show Window, and he's all about teaching people how to do window displays and sort of create the magic that's going to bring people into the store and to buy things. And consumer culture is becoming a much bigger thing in America at that time. And so he's sort of at the front edge of that, and as these department stores, so he was familiar with Chicago prior to going into Aberdeen, and actually in his idea behind doing this store, Baum's Bazaar, likened it to the Fair in Chicago, which was this kind of big department store, kind of in the Marshall Fields vein. And so he had that as a blueprint, and there was this idea that Aberdeen was going to become the next Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City kind of thing, and so he was going to be in at the ground floor. And so there was an opening, there was a niche, there's something. He came and he saw, and he said, "This is not being done here. I'm going to do it." And so he was very, in that way, he was also very pragmatic to a certain degree in terms of his business sense, that he thought he was providing something that wasn't already there, which makes sense. And for a while there was demand for it, but then obviously when a drought hit and survival was the key thing, and you weren't caring so much about the toys for Christmas.
Chris, can I jump in with one more thing?
No, please. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, no, because I wanted to actually, you may have already answered it, but I wanted to bring in kind of Nancy's comment here, which I thought was interesting. Nancy Nallens, who says that as someone who worked in advertising, I was surprised by the branding and consumer engagement that you talked about as part of his creative output. Clearly it was something he was really good at. And I guess that, there are probably, even today, there's a whole lot of people in advertising in various areas in marketing who are kind of frustrated novelists, movie makers, playwrights, filmmakers, etc. Looking for some way to exercise that creative gene.
Yeah, it's funny. I started out after graduating from school in advertising and direct marketing, and it really hit me at some point that it's like, what do I really want to do this, or because I thought I'd work on commercials and things, and then I said, do I really want to work on commercials? I wasn't even working on commercials, mostly working on print stuff. But I said, no, I actually want to make films, and so I left the field. And I do agree with you. There's a lot of people that I encountered then, and even later when I was in New York temping at a big firm, that were just frustrated screenwriters and movie directors and whatnot. But it does seem like a completely different industry. But in terms of advertising and whether Baum was like at the forefront, I don't think so. I mean, I think that was part of what was going on in the mid 19th century. There was advertising was huge in like capitalist societies, and so he was just part of that kind of zeitgeist, and people were figuring out how to persuade people to buy things. And advertising itself is, you could see it in ancient civilizations.
I always say, oh, go ahead, Randall.
No, I was going to say, I think that I don't think he was inventing it, whether he was advancing it. I think there's aspects of him that I think he was sort of, doing things that perhaps were a bit ahead of his time. I mean, like the show window, there were people that were talking about, how to display and do advertising. But he was understanding there was a need to sort of help other people understand how to do it. And so he was providing this trade magazine that was kind of spread the word of outside of the world of New York and Chicago. He was a traveling salesman before, so I think he understood that there was, a need for this, and that there could be he saw it as a way to sort of just kind of spread the word, so to speak, of how to do this, and to be sort of a proselytizer, I guess, to a certain degree. And he saw it as a way to make money. I mean, I think a lot of his things was really generating around, saw an opportunity, and not to say that it wasn't a genuine thing that he was doing, but I mean, he was opportunistic in a way that I think in the same way in terms of his own Oz world, that after he wrote the book, and then there was the musical that was very, very popular, he realized that there was a real, and he also got a lot of, he was starting to get fan mail, so kind of basically of people that enjoyed the story and wanted more of it, and he realized there was something to make of that, and he really started to work that, and he started to find ways to advertise that world that he was creating, and I think, so in that way, I think that sort of branding, if you want to call it that, I don't think they called it branding back then.
That's what they were doing to the cows in Aberdeen.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
go
ahead, Tracy. No, go ahead.
No. You finish your thought.
Well, I just we're making Rick work really hard here with the switching of the end.
I know. Thank you for recognizing how tough my life is.
But now I've kind of lost my track. But,
all right, I'll just say what I was going to say. I was just going to say, back, after the Civil War and into the turn of the century, it was the technology of the time that was making possible. Like the United States is like the trains are connecting people, consumer magazines are proliferating, and there's ads for things in those, and so suddenly there's like new jobs and new things to do, ways for people all over the place to hear about your products, and people started really taking advantage of that.
So one of the things that I was very curious about, it's safe to say that he experienced a few failures in his life before he got to the point of becoming a famous author. Did you encounter anything? I mean, what did people, his family and his friends and his associates, how did they react to him when he's saying, "Oh no, it's going to be chickens"? No, wait a minute, I think I'm going to try acting. No, I think. And what was their reaction to him and his many failures, and how did he kind of persevere to get to?
Unfortunately, we don't know. Maud, his wife, got rid of a lot of their personal papers. So if people were writing letters to him saying, "What? You've done it again?
Right.
You quit that job, or you've started this business?" We don't know, because she got rid of everything. That was for me, that was one of the biggest shocks of our research, that we weren't going to have the benefit of looking at a treasure trove of like most likely correspondence and maybe correspondence between Frank and Maud, since he was on the road so much. We know that he wrote letters. So it's hard to know. That's why in the film we're very careful to try not to. We don't definitively say a lot of things about his influences, and that's why we don't have a reaction to some of that stuff, because we just don't know. But you have to think they were like, what?
Well, exactly.
First it was.
So what do you think it was? I mean, you spent a lot of time with him. What do you think it was in his personality that kind of kept him going?
I think that he's one of these people that from a young age knew there was something that he wanted to do, and it just seemed like he had this energy, and writing was part of it. And he later said that he had told his sister that he wanted to be a great writer, and we didn't talk about this. This was in the film at one point, but it came out. But he even had a printing press when he was younger. There was a craze for kid printing presses, and his dad. This was before the fancy chickens. His dad indulged
before the fancy chickens.
got him a printing press, and so I think Randy mentioned it before. He wanted to tell stories, and I just think he was like, "There's something I want to do. There's something I want to say to the world." That's what we kind of went with. But he kept changing, and because he was successful at the castorine oil business, the Baum's castorine oil,
right.
But he didn't want to do it. It wasn't fitting his sensibility, his sense of himself, or what his goals were, which were not completely clear, but he just kept moving. Sometimes he failed, but sometimes he was successful and just left things. And so, I mean, you get a hint from that letter that we included about his decision to move to Aberdeen, that, he thought it was a land where he could be himself and find himself. The East Coast wasn't working for him. It sounded like it was stressful and competitive for him. So yeah, it's hard to say, but he finally landed on it, and you could see that you could see how Oz kind of all the pieces of his life kind of could come together in these children's books. He likes to tell stories. He likes to use his imagination. He gets to market things. He gets to market his own books. And he's interested in new technologies like movies. And I just was a confluence of, I think, all he wanted. And he liked to stay home with his family, and so he could write from home.
He's working home like the rest of us these days.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, Randy.
Well, the only thing I would say, I mean, he did have, I mean, he did benefit from the support of his family, and his father, was, in many, he doted on him, I think, in a way. He allowed him to explore some of these things, and we don't get into a lot of the details. There are other details, but like him, supporting him with the theater, and his father actually had a series of theaters in some of these small boom towns in the oil fields, and so originally, basically, Baum was supposed to sort of be the run those theaters and so on. So he kind of was getting himself involved with that after he had his stint in New York. But as you can see, he had these big aspirations. He didn't want to just do the theater. He wanted to produce. He wanted to direct. He wanted to write. He wanted to star, and he was actually successful with that first production with Maid of Erin. And but it didn't work out. And then the constant thing that he was, I think, for him, the obstacle solved was that he needed to support his family. Once he got married and started having a family, that was the constant strain for him to sort of to be able to maintain that and find ways to do that. And I think that was that struggle. And I think he was fortunate that he had Maud, his wife, who I think actually believed in his potential with these ideas, and was given I think, a little more freedom to be able to do that in some ways. And I think that but he benefited, I think, from the strength of the women that were around him as well, in terms of
right. I was going to say,
present
company accepted. This guy had the greatest mother-in-law of anybody, in history, who believed in him and supported him and helped him make connections. So family obviously is really important.
And also inspired him by her own intellect and the work that she was doing. His mother-in-law, Maud's mother, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, was, a fascinating individual and a formidable person who, was known for her activism and her radical upbringing that she had. And as in her growing up, her family their house was part of the Underground Railroad, and she was, along with one of the early women starting the suffrage movement with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and there was a kind of a split towards the end of her life with them. But she was the author, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, of the 2-volume or 3-volume history of women that they were doing. So, and she's the one that was involved with thinking about theosophy, that really, I think, sort of got Baum at least introduced to it, if not necessarily maybe a true acolyte of it. But he was very, he was taking in a lot of ideas that were coming from places outside of him, through individuals like his mother-in-law and his wife. So.
And I want to pick up on something that Tracy mentioned. So he's out there in South Dakota, and there's a drought, and it's terrible, and his business goes out of business. But it really kind of I have to think it informs the beginning of The Wizard of Oz, and both the book and the movie that we see. We're talking about this the other day. The beginning of the movie is black and white, and I always thought that was because they hadn't invented color film until halfway through the movie. But that informs that, and then he moves to Chicago. And he's in Chicago, I believe I'm correct, during the Columbian Exposition, the great World's Fair in Chicago. And there's a great white city that's built in Chicago, and seems like it must be the model for the Emerald City. And I had never even thought about that. And but in the book, I guess they're all wearing green goggles. So the Emerald City is really the white city, but you're wearing green goggles.
It's the power of deception. It's the
there's something we read. I can't. Maybe you remember better than me about how they had light, of course, on it at night, and sometimes there was shrubbery around, and sometimes there was like a green tint on the buildings. And so there's people, we don't know for sure. We can't literally say he saw this and then he did this and put it in the book. We can't do that. But you have to think that it's the biggest thing happening in town, and that that might have been something that he noticed.
Yeah, that definitely blew me away.
So one of the things that interests me is this idea of an American story versus a European story or an old story. So you say in the film that it's the first American fairy tale, and it's different than maybe the fairy tales he had read as a youngster. So what's an old fairy tale and what's a new American fairy tale, and what are the differences?
You can go ahead, Mandy.
Well, so Baum in the introduction to his in his introduction to the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, actually, and he's very clear about this. He says he's creating a modern fairy tale, one where all the heartache and nightmares are taken out. And so I think that there was this, the fairy tales of European fairy tales are very didactic, and they have, these moralistic fairy tales. Not to say there isn't philosophy and moralism in the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and there's things that are meant to scare you and meant to scare children as part of the storytelling, whether it's the witches, the monsters, the giants, the beasts, and so on. So there are things that are actually quite horrifying if you think about the Wonderful Wizard of Oz too. But there's a sense of optimism and in the book that is different than the European fairy tales, and it also, it does have landmarks that are American, and that would be in the beginning of the story with in Kansas. It's a very American moment to be starting there, and it would have resonated very strongly, I think, with a lot of people in America at that time. Reading about Kansas and the drought and the difficulties, and out in the farm, and things like scarecrows, and people have talked about the lion potentially being, they would have seen things like lions in the zoo and things like that. So there were certain aspects of the Tin Man has an aspect of sort of the industrialization that was going on around, and so there are. So in that respect, of having it an American setting, is, I think, partly why you could be called America's first fairy tale.
There's also, I want to just say that you have a clip in your film, which, guys, I would just remind our audience that we're talking to the filmmakers of the documentary American Oz, which has already premiered on PBS, and I know from some of the comments of viewers that some people have seen it and really liked it, but it's also still streaming. You can still see it, so you should go check it out. And there's a piece in the film which sort of talks about how the origins of the beginning of the story in that kind of drought-stricken middle America. So let's just take a look at that.
The drought that began in 1889 dragged on for nearly 2 years, exposing the lie of railroad promoters and land agents that the rain follows the plow.
The great American dream turned out to be a nightmare for these people. And Frank Baum was out there witnessing this. And all of this is expressed in the opening chapter of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. The sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass with little cracks running through it. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere.
I think one of the most telling moments in The Wizard of Oz is right at the beginning with the description of Auntie Em and Uncle Henry as old before their time, as unable to imagine happiness.
Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and did not know what joy was. He looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke.
Baum, in many ways, is saying that this Western dream seems to have hit a wall. It is a place of great disappointment for many of the people who had invested their lives in it.
So he seems to be inspired. We had a question about sort of what inspired him. He seems to be inspired by all these things in his life. He's on the frontier, out in the West, the Midwest during the drought. He's in Chicago during the Columbian Exposition. He has his own interests in the sort of the fantasy world of Baum's Bazaar. So he writes this book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. He's 44 years old. It's 1900. It's a new century, and it's published. And what happens?
Well, it's highly successful. It's
like instantly, right?
Yeah, it does quite well.
It goes viral, I guess.
Well, but kind of getting one of the things I'm curious about, since we've just talked about how it's such a uniquely American story, is the reaction or the success just in America, or is this a story that kind of goes around the globe? I mean, is it still a major hit just in America, or is it resonating
Actually,
elsewhere?
I don't know. I don't know that I have the answer for that. We didn't actually look into that. I think that I imagine it would have been published in England and so on as well, but I don't have that. I mean, it did very well immediately, and they had to do multiple printings of it, afterwards. And
doesn't he run into somebody though? He's traveling in
Europe?
Well,
he did travel. I mean, it did travel. Well, that's
in
about
Egypt,
6 years
maybe?
later in Egypt.
Okay.
That's about 6 years or 7 years later. So it definitely did get published outside of the U.S. Whether it was immediately, I don't know, but it certainly was.
But I thought that was someone traveling that was probably an
from the
English
US?
speaker with the
Okay.
or something. Yeah,
It's hard.
the little girl.
Unclear.
I didn't think it was somebody from another country.
But it's
I
like
mean,
this,
someone from the country.
Yeah.
It's like this book that's different from anything else, and it sort of feels very modern to me, like it's Chronicles of Narnia or Harry Potter or all the kind of modern fantasy stuff, and it does not feel 1900 at all. And I know that Jules Verne's around in 1900, and you have some of that, but it like rockets to this success. Any thought or idea of just why was it so successful? Why did it seem to fill this need that nobody knew was there?
Well, I think that in some degree, which we try to express in the film, is that it was very different than anything else. And I think you can argue that as much or equally as important to the writing of that book was the illustrations of the book. And W.W. Denslow's illustrations who was a well-known and illustrator at the time, created between the two of them, they created this extremely gorgeous book that has these color illustrations that are kind of spread throughout the entire book in sort of these dual colors that kind of shift as they go through the book, and also numerous full-page, full-color illustrations. And I think it just caught people's interest and fascination. And then when they started reading the book, it was well received by the press. I think they felt like, I think it was a New York Times article where one of the articles talked about there was these rare pieces of philosophy on every page, and there's a sense of the camaraderie that they have, these unique characters that you have never seen before, having the Scarecrow who comes to life and the Tin Man, and I think that there was just. I can't speak to specifically why whether it quote unquote filled a need or not, but it certainly was. It's shown and was different from anything else I think that would have been seen in the bookstores at the time, and people really gravitated towards it. And it did capture the imaginations, whether I think of adults and kids alike. I'm sure that the parents loved reading the books to the kids as much as the kids that were of reading age were reading it themselves. And certainly, I think it, in terms of some of the themes that it deals with, dealing with sort of the empowerment of the powerless, that you have these and sort of the camaraderie and the community that's engendered through the Dorothy and her three companions, and that it does have that sense of optimism and hope, and I think also at that time, the idea of home was a big part of America, and sort of the idea of returning home and going, and that was something that I think would have resonated very strongly.
But I also want to hear from the person who's dragged around 14 Oz books everywhere on this.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had a lot of books in my room. I was allowed to buy every summer from the weekly reader book club that they had this like leaflet and you could check off the books, and I was allowed to. The only time I was allowed to get as many as I wanted. So I'd go through the list and check out these books, and we'd cut out the thing and my mom would send off the check, and then this box of books would arrive every summer. That's not quite how I got the Oz books, but reading was really important to me. And but the Oz books, and I guess this is also why I kept them with me, they're so beautiful. Like, so mine didn't look like the cover that you've shown. I have my covers were white, but they were beautiful. They had the illustrations on the front, and when you opened them up, there was drawings in color. And, as a kid, of course, I mean, as an adult, I'm drawn to colorful things, When you think about, what web pages you get excited to see, we like color and we liked energy. And so I think they just were special and fantastical, So that's my 50 cents on why they were popular. You like to think about these other worlds and places and adventures. I think adventures were a big thing. And I live near woods, and so we would kind of go on adventures in the woods right near our house. So if you're coming home and reading stories about adventures, you play those games, as a kid out when you're, with your friends.
So, it's hard not to watch the film and not think, wow, this is like the first Harry Potter, right?
Right.
So he creates a whole Oz industry. I mean, there's 14 books, and he tries to do films, and it's just it's a very big deal. And I was kind of curious, why is it that we know The Wizard of Oz, the movie, and that book, but his other books seem to have gotten lost, or not as much play. Nobody's made any of the other books into movies. Why do you think it's this one book that kind of has some resonance, and why don't we consider the rest of his work?
I think it kind of go ahead, Tracy.
No, go ahead.
I think it kind of depends.
People have tried to make them, right? People have tried to make movies out of the other books.
Baum himself tried to when he had his own company. But I mean, I think the reason that The Wizard of Oz is popular now is because of the 1939 film. Yeah. I mean, I think the 1939 film was transformative in terms of sort of really creating or imprinting in the American consciousness The Wizard of Oz. I mean, I think if you look at the references to The Wizard of Oz today, typically, oftentimes it's referring to the movie more than specifically the book. Right. So I think that that's sort of what has been the entry point for a lot of people. And, I think that in terms of for the Oz stories as a whole, I think they were very popular. They were continuing to be popular. And there were elements of those that I think people have perhaps touched upon. And Baum tried to do a musical out of one of the other ones, do another musical, and that didn't quite work out as well. So, but I think it's because of that main stories, I think, is the one that people sort of connect to most strongly. And there's people that really kind of follow along. There are other characters that come out of it, like Jack Pumpkinhead and TikTok, and some of those may actually show up in some of the offshoots of things that have happened more recently, other sorts of series, television series. There was one I'm kind of blank on some of these names.
There's a lot to it.
The Tin Man or something like that. And there's been several different, TV series that have been based on the Oz story, and some of them may have actually included other portions of the Oz universe that weren't in the. The '39 film was not going to go back, and it was. It itself doesn't. It's a shortened version of the original book too. It's
well,
not.
And I want to just jump in, and I'm sorry to jump in on
you.
But one of the things, you have footage in your film from there's a 1910 film that came out, and it's a whole complicated story about how that happened. But you use some of the footage in your film, and we pulled some off of YouTube just to be able to take a look at it. And it's extraordinary. This is 29 years before the 1939 film, and obviously the techniques are a little bit different. But there's the forest, and there's the trees, the angry trees, and there's the good witch, and then we have we have the cowardly lion. We have some characters we don't know, and I was just like amazed to discover this film and the fact that there'd been stage musicals, that he did these things called radio plays as part of his travelogue. In a lot of ways, L. Frank Baum sort of seems like Disney before Disney, or he wanted to be Disney, right? He almost had all the elements, the fantastic stories, the marketing ability, the desire to make this entertainment empire, and it almost happens for him.
No, I agree. He definitely was ahead of his time with that, and I think that it was, the radio plays and fairy logs were fascinating, and that 1910 film was actually done it was produced by Selig Film Company Production. It was actually out of Chicago, and one of the earliest film studios, and that was the company he worked with to do the films that were in the radio plays, which was this sort of multimedia advertising tool for one of his new Oz books, which was a mixture of lantern slides that were like a travelogues,
right,
and also these live action movies, or the moving pictures that were hand colored, kind of Lumiere like, and he kind of mixed it. And he was there, sort of in this all white suit, looking a little bit like the Mark Twain kind of get up. That being the narrator of the story, I think it was mostly trying to bring his characters to life and onto screen. And I think he realized that there was an opportunity with movies to sort of create a new way to envision his stories in a new medium.
Chris, can I
no,
throw up Skip's question?
Yeah.
So we're going to take a radical turn here, guys. So just everybody center and get ready for it. But Skip Cornett wants to talk about Baum's attitude towards Native Americans as expressed in his writings during his time out in Aberdeen. And this is most definitely something, this involves the Lakota. This is definitely something you deal with in the film. So we haven't talked about it so far, but it is a big part of your film and of his story. And it's kind of a sad part, because at first he seems like to be very generous in spirit towards the Native Americans, and then seems to kind of change course halfway through.
He. So for those who aren't familiar, people were moving west and not really thinking about the fact that there were people living in the land out
lived
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we kind of set that, we talk about that in the documentary, and so the Indians are being, corralled into reservations and losing land, continuing to lose land, and a movement called the Ghost Dance begins, and it's a religious type movement, and it was a movement not just with the Lakota, but it involved dancing, and we don't say this exactly like this in the film, but this notion of like brown bodies dancing, it made some people nervous, and the U.S. government outlawed the ghost dance. And Randy, you want to pick up the story from here?
Sure. Basically, it was seen, by the white settlers that this was, basically was a prelude to an uprising, and that was the Great Fear, which had been, this long-standing story that, in American history that, that the Native Americans were going to, attack you and come and raid your town, and so Baum was in Aberdeen, and Baum's role in Aberdeen, in essence, he was a booster. When he came there, even as a store, he needed Aberdeen to succeed for him to succeed. And then he gets involved with his newspaper, and he follows in the same. In essence, that's kind of where, he knows that the people that are moving out there, the hope for Aberdeen is for this to become this white civilization, basically, in this area. It wasn't, and this is starting to get, there's obstacles. There's the droughts happening, and there's this fear, what they call the Indian scare that was happening at the time. And with the rise of the ghost dance, that gets ratcheted up. And Sitting Bull, who was on the Pine Ridge Reservation, not too far from Aberdeen, a couple hundred miles, is killed in a botched arrest attempt, claiming that he was supporting the ghost dance. And, at the time, Baum was kind of saying that these were rumors that were being spread by the media. It's kind of like fake news today to some degree. The media was just making up things about how the Native Americans were going to attack and so on. And so Baum was basically saying, he was pushing against this and saying these are just rumors, but he does change his his tune, I guess you could say. That's not the right way to say it. And he writes an editorial calling for the extermination of Native Americans, and basically says, that following to this trope of the vanishing Indian, that the best thing is for them to kill the remaining ones that are even left, and basically take over, in essence, for white civilization to continue progressing west, and they are in the way of doing this. And he's channeling a thought that's not his own. He's channeling a thought that's very hateful.
His own thought, yeah. But it's what a lot of Americans are thinking at the time. And I would say that some people still think that way, that it's like, we made something out of the land. They weren't doing anything with it, as if the only way that land is, valued as if there's like highways and houses and things like that on them. That's progress.
So when he has a second editorial, and on the heels of that, there was Wounded Knee happens, which was, the massacre of, when the numbers are, not definitive, but up to over 300 Lakota men, women, and children. A lot of women and children are massacred by the U.S. cavalry, and he also has another editorial in a similar vein after that. So I think you have to think of looking at an individual like Baum, as he's complicated, and he is. He carries lots of different ideas within him, and yes, he does have a sense of tolerance for women and for women's equality, but he didn't see that for Native Americans, and that was not unusual at the time. And America is a racist country, and it's part of our past, and he's part of that past, and I think it's important for us to deal with that in understanding his story.
Well, I think anybody who watches this show knows that history is complicated, and people are complicated, and didn't expect to end on quite that note.
Yeah.
Didn't get to talk about how obviously the Wizard of Oz inspired the Ghost Army with his deception and fooling people and stuff. And
I was waiting for that.
I know.
We'll have to bring you back for a second hour to get deeper into that at some point. But it's a really fascinating, nuanced, really well done documentary film. American Oz. It's streaming now with PBS American Experience, and I certainly recommend seeing it. There's a lot in there to chew on, whether you're a big Wizard of Oz fan or just kind of want to know about that little piece of Americana. And so, Tracy and Randy, thank you so much for joining us. That hour went by very fast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun.
It's a real pleasure.
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
Bye.
Good luck, guys.
See you later.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so Christopher.
Yes.
Yes, that I have my. I didn't, bring it out, but I do have the Wicked Witch here with me. Where is she? She's. I'll get you and your little dog too. Marilyn does a spot-on imitation of the Wicked Witch.
Really?
Usually, it requires.
Is that when you've been bad?
The right set of circumstances, and we're not in that set of circumstances quite right now.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So I should just give a reminder to everybody who's still with us that we will be off next week. You'll have to find something else to do with your Sunday. I don't know what that is.
Catch up on your reading.
Yeah, catch up on your reading. And you can start with A Mortal Blow to the Confederacy. Actually, I'm not positive it's out yet, but I think it might be out soon. And it's written by Mark Bielski, who's our colleague at Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. And we're going to be bringing Mark on the show to talk about this. It's about the fall of New Orleans during the Civil War in 1862. And so I'm looking forward to that. And, Chris, I got a homework assignment, too, for the audience if they're up for it. I mean, I don't know. You guys, you have to tell me if you're up for it. But we have just started a new History Happy Hour Facebook page. Yeah, unique to History Happy Hour. It's standalone Facebook page. Can you find it?
Let us know
Chris,
you
can find it. But can you find it and like or follow it? Because there might be a couple of things called History Happy Hour, but this is the only one with our pretty faces adorning the page.
Original content, news, drama,
it's
special effects, lights.
It's not there yet, but
we all have something to
none
hope
of that
for.
is there yet, but it will be.
But believe me, it will be.
So check that out. And of course, as we've been mentioning and beating the banner on. If you want to keep in touch with the things that are going on with History Happy Hour, please. We won't send out too many newsletters. Just no more than one an hour.
This list will not be sold to anyone.
No, will not be sold to anyone. It's just
not
for
that anyone would want to buy it.
Yeah, I don't know who would want to buy that. But anyway, thank you very much, everybody,
Thanks,
for
everybody.
joining us today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Be safe.